Welcome to today's presentation and the Introduce Investor Days. My name is Carl Bokvist. I'm the responsible analyst from ABG covering Nordic waterproofing. And with us today we have CEO Martin Ellis. And with that, I leave it over to you for about a 20-minute presentation followed by some questions from my end.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you for coming. Thanks for your interest. We're happy to have you. And I'm going to present a case where we have both top line and bottom line growth. We have stable markets, relatively few small volatility in our end demand. We have a 5% dividend yield right now at the current share price. And we have a significant exposure to green economy, to sustainability in building materials. So that's the case I'm going to present to you. Our core business is waterproofing. We produce waterproofing material and we also install it in some of our countries. So what is critical is to make the use of our material easy. Why is that? Because labor on job sites is expensive and we need to make sure that these people can work as efficiently as possible to make our customers profitable. And we have a complete range of not only waterproofing material, but also, as I mentioned, environmentally friendly solutions, where we produce wood-based prefabricated element, which basically absorb CO2 compared to a traditional concrete solution. And we also have green infrastructure, where we install green surfaces on buildings and other infrastructure. So this is a short summary of where our products appear on a building. The core demand for us is in flat roofs, big boxes basically for logistics centers, factories, office buildings, social housing, etc. But we also have products for the pitched roof housing sector. This is much smaller for us, and it explains why we haven't been so much exposed to the downturn in housing in Sweden, beside the fact that Sweden is obviously only a part of our total business. We're going to see that. This gives you the idea of where we are located geographically. So very much centered on Scandinavia, but for some of our product lines, we have products which travel to some extent, and where we are locally present in Benelux, UK, and Poland and Germany to some extent to use our material, our waterproofing rolls basically, and make prefabricated solutions for our customers. Where, for example, in roofing, you can measure out the roof entirely and then prefabricate that waterproofing for this roof in a plant under a controlled environment, better quality, more efficiency, and then just ship it to the roof and install it very quickly. Again, trying to make installation as easy as possible for our customers. In terms of the split of our businesses, we have 73% of what we're doing is industry, fabrication, manufacturing, and the rest is what we call installation services, which is basically contracting. Most of it is roofing contracting, where we ourselves install the products on the roof. In terms of the cyclicality, an important aspect of our portfolio is that 60% of what we do goes into renovation work, and there the cyclicality is quite weak. People basically renovate the building when they have to renovate it. And 40% only goes to new build, where you can obviously have stronger cycles. We have basically two sales channels. I would say the preferred sales channel is directly to the customer, who is, in our case, the roofing contractor, when we don't do that ourselves. We have a large group of customers who are roofers also. And what we do there is we're dealing with small to medium-sized companies who can use some support from us. Not only the product, which obviously has to be top quality and top logistics, top service levels, very fast delivery, but also we can help them with legal aspects of their business, financial aspects, marketing aspects in some cases. We're talking about companies who employ 5 to 50 people, for example, quite small structures. So we create a very strong link with these people, and therefore the relationship is extremely sticky. It really, we need to really not perform for these people to decide to change their supplier of materials. So that is the biggest part of our sales channels, but we also sell to distribution, which is builders merchants, Excelbücher and the like. The situation there is slightly different. There's more price sensitivity. We provide less services to these people, so we have a lower cost for our internal efforts, but we also get usually lower gross margins. But bottom line, the two segments are quite comparable in profitability. In our core business, waterproofing, we have strong market positions in the countries where we are present, especially Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. To a lesser extent, Norway, where we haven't been as long as in the other countries. But usually we are dealing with 2 to 4 competitors, local competitors, maximum, and market shares are quite stable. We usually have about 1/3 of the niche we are serving. So quite solid positions, and we have, to a good extent, we have pricing power with our customers because of the service aspect that I mentioned before. We have been listed on the stock exchange in 2016, and since that time we've started a quite aggressive acquisition strategy, and we managed to make 8 significant acquisitions in that time span from 2017 to now. And most of those are diversifications of our base business. So I'm not going to go through each of these, but they are all located either in Scandinavia or in the Benelux. And I would say the predominant majority, the vast majority, have been as successful or more successful compared to what we expected at the time of acquisitions. So a few examples is EPDM Systems, for example, is a Dutch company which we source our material to, synthetic rubber material for waterproofing, and they then prefabricate it like I described just a minute ago. And so they are in touch with the end customer, and it's a very successful concept. One aspect I would like to mention too is when we make acquisitions, usually we buy only companies we know. We need to have good management, outstanding management if possible. That's really important. And usually we give them incentives. Either they keep shares or they have an incentive program with this link to financial performance. And that system works really well. And in the case of EPDM Systems, for example, the CEO has 1/3 of the shares, which is sort of the maximum we usually see. But it's an excellent system. SPD Painting and Ellis are diversifications in Finland, where we offer not only waterproofing solutions with bitumen-based material, but also liquid waterproofing. It's not very far from our core business, of course, but it's a diversification. And in the case of SPD Paintings, for example, we also create floors for cruise ships, big cruise ships, which are fabricated in Turku, where we have a very strong position. Ellis is more geared towards roof maintenance, which is something we used to do a bit, but they are really specialists, and they maintain also individual houses very successfully. This line here, Torsing Element and RVT, is prefabricated roof and facade elements. And you can see examples here, for example, where you would build elements which are up to 20 meters wide, 1 story high, all based on wood today, and which allow an extremely fast building cycle. So you can, for example, this floor, you could build significantly in less than 1 week. A very, very fast installation time. Vectec is the company which deals with green surfaces, where we grow sedum in Sweden and Norway, and where these are then molded into rolls, which are sent to the building site and installed again quite quickly. Distribond is our last acquisition in Belgium, and these people use a bit of our synthetic rubber material again to create small to medium-sized ponds. In Belgium and in Benelux in general, there's a fashion for people to have a small pond in their garden with fish maybe in it, or swimming ponds where you don't need chlorine, you have something which looks like a pond, but you can actually use it for bathing, swimming. And this company we bought recently is very successful, and we now plan to extend the concept to other countries. That is one other aspect of our acquisition strategy. We try to acquire a successful concept, usually local company, and then we try to expand it to basically all of Scandinavia, all of Northern Western Europe, where we have good HR capabilities. So we're already present in these countries. We have good people working for us, and we try to leverage that by expanding these concepts in their country. I mentioned growth. You can see we've grown significantly. A lot of that obviously is acquisitions, but we've also grown organically, and that's really important for us to maintain. And you can see that EBITDA also has grown during that period. In terms of strategy, we have made these acquisitions. Now we are focusing this year especially on profitability and organic growth, and within organic growth, again, expanding the platforms we newly acquired. So especially prefabricated elements and the green infrastructure. When we look at an acquisition target, we want to enhance our product and service offering, basically selling more different categories to our existing customers where this is possible. Second, quite important, we want to benefit from megatrends. One megatrend is usage of wood in construction, which is growing quite significantly, not only in Scandinavia, but also in some European countries on the continent. Another megatrend we see is the green infrastructure aspect is provide products which allow customers to comply either with regulations. In some countries you have regulations as to the number of square meters that need to be green, or to pursue their own architectural wishes, which also trend towards sustainability and green surfaces. When possible, we also like to forward integrate. I mentioned the example in Holland, EPDM Systems, where we supplied initially just the rolls, the waterproofing material, but where we went one step down the line to be in direct contact with the end customer. Obviously, it gives us much better market intelligence. It allows us to perfect our product specifications to be 100% in line with demand. Number of advantages. Promoting sustainability has been a more recent strategic avenue for us, maybe last 2 years when we first started to move into these wood-based prefabricated elements. And it's going to be one criterion we'll look at when we look at additional targets in our acquisition moves. Sustainability, as I mentioned, is important. We also think we have a very good general ESG position. Part of that is due that we are from Scandinavia. Basically, you have quite good governance compared to the world average in Scandinavia, of course. So it's no big deal to excel in that arena. We have a code of conduct, whistleblowing, which actually worked once very well, only once, fortunately. So we're quite happy, but it is obviously operational. And we obviously check our suppliers. But again, compared to other industries, it's relatively easy to be good in that aspect. So we really focus on the sustainability in terms of environmental characteristics. So there's a number of examples here, and I would just try to focus on the CO2 balance. That's quite interesting because in our prefabricated element business, we use 16,000 cubic meters of wood rather than concrete, which obviously has a very negative footprint in terms of CO2. And wood has a positive, it absorbs CO2, it stocks CO2. So we, all in all, have a very strongly positive CO2 balance in what we do. In terms of the current status, in terms of our performance, these are figures from Q2. We can't go any further in time, but we see that sales are up 21% again, and 13% is from acquisitions, but we also have 6% organic growth in local currency, and then the weak SEK comes on top of that. We have an increase in operating income, and as I mentioned, we have currently 5% yield for SEK per share last year. And we see an overall stable demand outlook. There's a lot of talk. I mean, there's some reality in the Swedish housing market, where there's been a downturn already, and there's some talk about Finland maybe weakening next year. So that might well be, and we're prepared to deal with it, but we haven't seen anything internally so far in that respect. We see very strong demand still in Denmark, and Norway is stable also. Our financial targets, for those who don't know us so well yet, we have targets in terms of growth. Organic growth has to be stronger than the general demand, if possible. In terms of profitability, we have an ROCE target. The reason we don't use a return on sales is we have a mixed portfolio of industrial activity, where return on sales is higher, but capital employed also, and contracting activities, where there's very little capital requirements, but also a lower return on sales figure. So we don't want to distort. We don't want to manage our portfolio as a function of these things which are not comparable. So ROCE is our benchmark, 13%. We are slightly below after Q2, but we're confident we'll hit this 13% again very soon. The capital structure, we want to be below 3 times financial debt on EBITDA. And again, we will probably be significantly below that at the end of the year. We have obviously a very cyclical capital requirement because we have a strong season which goes until October, November, and some weak months, which is basically December to February because of the weather. Dividend policy, at least 50% of net income. Our board of directors is, I would say, has a strong background related to building materials. Our management team, basically, they have been around successfully for quite a long time, which is important because of the customer relationship. These people are really in touch with the local customers, and that's critical. Our shareholding is relatively stable, I would say, and some significant share percentages there. Our official outlook is, again, we will do slightly better than last year in terms of our operating results, and that is unchanged since the beginning of this year. So that was my presentation.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So perhaps the first question, you commented a bit on the stable outlook. But if we perhaps take a step back instead, the situation people can relate to perhaps is the financial crisis. Can you give some detail on how your markets developed during that time and how Nordic Waterproofing perhaps developed? I know that Nordic Waterproofing didn't exist at the time. It was a merger, but it would be interesting to know.
Yeah, that's an excellent question because it really demonstrates when you look back to the year 2010, which was probably the worst year in terms of demand, we still made significant money. Obviously less than right now, but we had probably slightly more than half of the EBIT ratio that we have today. So good money, I would say. And it demonstrates how relatively insensitive we are to the cycle, because there was some dramatic swings, especially in Denmark, where there was a housing bubble and then just crashed, almost like in the US. And our performance was positive, clearly, and I think it's sort of a reassuring factor.
So then, let's say the worst year that has ever happened to Nordic waterproofing? What sort of declining growth are we talking about here in terms of?
We can see 10 to 15% decline if things get really ugly. So again, relatively mild.
Yeah. And then perhaps if we go into, let's say you talked a bit about Sweden and you talked about Finland. Then you have a prefab business in Denmark with Tåsinge, and you also have a bit of that in Norway. What are you seeing on the Danish and Norwegian markets?
Yeah, right now we see stability at a quite high level, not extreme, but a good level historically. And we see stability. You mentioned the prefab business. That's interesting because there we have seen a bit of reluctancy by customers to actually jump into the project. So what happens there is they ask us for, we design, it's bespoke projects, complex projects. We have a very good CAD/CAM capability. So they ask us basically to design a lot of the project, and then they can take some time or not to say, okay, bank, now you have the order, and please deliver. And that delay has increased in Denmark, and it explains part of the sort of difficulties we have right now in the prefab business compared to the normal run of the business. So there have been a number of customers who have delayed projects, and you might interpret that as a sign of a coming slowdown. We're not convinced of that at this point, but it might be a sign.
And then if we look at Nordic waterproofing as of today, how large share of a group is waterproofing products? How much is prefab, and how much is green roofing?
Yeah, I would say it's still about 75 to 80% is waterproofing related, and that's not only roofs. That can be railway, bridges, all sorts of infrastructure. The bulk, obviously, is construction of office and other box type of spaces. That's the ratio.
And then when you say infrastructure, I mean, you have previously talked about residential and non-residential, where non-residential is about 2/3.
Yes.
How much is infrastructure? Is that possible to distinguish?
That's probably not more than 10%. I would say it's probably close to 5%. So it's not a huge part.
And then if we look at, for example, 2016, it was a very good year. Raw materials were very favorable.
Yep.
Since then, we've had the situation with different raw materials, if one could say that. But what is your strategy in terms of compensating for raw materials? What's your view on raw materials going forward? Yeah,
again, very interesting question, because raw materials in our core business, the waterproofing manufacturing, are a huge part of our cost. It's about 80% of our cost. The good news is that we are immune to Chinese competition or local labor cost competition, because labor is a very small part of our cost basis. But the other side of the coin is obviously if oil explodes, then we get an impact, because we basically have three raw materials. One is bitumen, quite related to oil. Second is SBS, is a plastifier, also an oil derivative. And the third one is the textile, which we impregnate with the mix of the two former. So in bitumen, we have had quite successful hedging. You can hedge bitumen at the present time, and we've done so reasonably successfully. But you can have swings. Right now, we don't see any huge uptick in oil, but that can change very quickly. The two other materials are consolidated industries, so our suppliers have pricing power. We can't do much in terms of pressuring them, but the trend has been right now rather slowly downwards. Also, it's a function of the world economy, obviously, and so we don't see any big problem there. If there's a big raw material price hike, we can pass it on to customers, but it takes a while. It takes 6 to 9 months. And when they come down dramatically, we usually are able to hold on to our sales prices, maybe 1 or 2% down, but we get a windfall. And that's exactly what happened in 2016, which you mentioned. We had a windfall because raw material prices were at historic lows, and our prices didn't move much.
And then if we look at the other leg of Nordic waterproofing, I mean, stable organic growth, but the M&A part of the business, what has really driven growth in the recent years. What does the current pipeline look like? Which areas are you looking into? Could we expect to see something in the near term, or are you, as you said, focusing on organic growth for the rest of 2019?
Yeah, baseline is we're focusing on organic growth and profitability. And the reason for that is that, as you know, multiples are quite high historically right now, and we don't want to overpay. So we'd rather wait a bit to get a good deal. So we're really disciplined in terms of how much we pay. And also, we usually want to know the companies we are buying, and that limits the scope to some extent.
Perfect. I see that our time is approaching 25.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much. Thank you.